So thank you very much, and hello everyone. So my name is Ricardo Pérez Marco, and I'm going to present some ideas for an alternative routing algorithm for the Lightning Network in collaboration with Cyril Grossman. So we are both mathematicians that we work together mostly on mathematical topics, but this time is slightly different. So it's a kind of an old idea that I wanted to present. So it's a first draft. So just to mix some ideas from other fields that it's about thinking about scaling the Lightning Network and making a routing algorithm that may work for a large scale network. So you have a paper on arXiv that just appeared 2 days ago. So it was a little sort of my commitment to have something in writing, which is a first draft. And so I'm going to explain a little bit what I understand by a decentralized network, because this is the goal, is to have a payment system that scales and is decentralized, as robust as Bitcoin, as anti-fragile, I would say. So Fabrice has already explained most of what is the Lightning Network about and some history of it, so I will just recall a few properties that I need in order to address the mathematical problem of routing. So the Lightning Network right now, you have pictures of it. So it looks impressive, right? You have all this graph, very richly connected, and in some sense is decentralized. Decentralization doesn't mean that it's homogeneous. I mean, it's a fact of life that there will be always nodes with more connections, and already Pareto observed these wealth distributions in many different analyses of wealth in different nations, and it happens also for the networks, for the kind of networks that we use. Decentralizing means that several things. I'm going to try to give some concepts of decentralization. This picture is nice, but it's at the same time it's scary because it means that we have a knowledge of the network. And to have a knowledge of the topology of the network is a vector of attack. It would be much better to not have it anyway. It's nice for making a graphical representation. Now, liberté, égalité, not fraternité, but diversité and verificability. Let me explain what I mean by that. So, some necessary conditions for decentralization. So in mathematics, when we say necessary, it doesn't mean it's sufficient, but some properties that we want to see for talking about a decentralized network will be an open and affordable access to the network, okay? Liberté. Nodes can process information they want, so you are free to process or not process, to participate or not. You should follow the rules, so you should have equal access to the information, and it's the same equal footing for different nodes, so the same power. They should follow the same protocol, otherwise the protocol should penalize them, not following the common rules. And ownership of nodes should be well distributed, so some diversity, richly connected, so preferably thousands of nodes, not just 10 nodes, okay? Randomly connected also, so the initial connection algorithm should randomize the connections. And all nodes check the information, okay? Verificability should verify, and nobody trusts anyone, and everyone verifies everyone. So not fraternité, okay? You don't trust anyone in the decentralized network, is the way it works. Okay, now just a few facts about payment channels. The properties I use is that, well, they allow off-chain transactions. So this is the interest, that you can do very fast and anonymous transactions between two peers. Only the initial commitment transaction and the settlement transaction are on-chain. I wouldn't go into the specifics, okay? Because I just want to address the routing problem, and I want the properties of payment channels. So they could be one directional or bidirectional. Of course, bidirectional channels seems much better, but it's not clear to me that in a practical sense they are much better than unidirectional. So in some sense, unidirectional, only one-way channels are easy to handle, okay? And if you create a rich enough network, well, I mean, you can open both unidirectional channels in both directions anyway. Payments most of the time go in one direction, okay? So maybe even bidirectional is not that interesting. So we just leave the idea like this. Some constraints and properties is that each channel has a maximal volume that is decided by the two peers forming the payment channel. And so the transactions are instantaneous and anonymous. You can compose the payment channels. This is the really important property. So I'm not specific. There are different sorts of implementation of payment channels, and you can have many, but the important property is that you can compose them in order to make a network, payment network. So if Alice and Bob have a payment channel and Bob and Charles also, then Alice can pay Charles through Bob, all right? This is what I mean by the transitive property. And of course, in order for Bob to be in the middle, and it should have some fee incentive for participating as an intermediary of the payment, all right? So this is essentially the properties I need in order to analyze the network. Now, so Fabrice has already told you about the history of the Lightning Network, and many people have contributed and give ideas to see what we have now and is being implemented. So mathematically speaking, the Lightning Network is a weighted-oriented graph, and you know the mathematical problem is to find the roots of payments. So it's decentralized, rich and randomly connected. Well, you just go back to the properties I listed at the beginning. And we assume that on top of the Lightning Network, we have a communication network, all right? In particular, peers that have a channel, an open channel, should communicate, should be able to communicate. But maybe others. For example, Alice and Bob should be able to communicate even if they don't have a payment channel, but they want to make a payment. Alice wants to pay Bob, all right? So they need to communicate. So anyway, what is critical here is that we have fast communications. I will assume that nodes reserve some mempool space for routing purposes. Okay, you will need some memory space. And the main problem that they want to address is a decentralized payment path finding algorithm. So how to find the payment path without too much knowledge about the geometry of the network. Now, some problems and difficulties is that the global knowledge, as I said, the global knowledge of the geometry is a vector of attack. There are solutions that are being implemented with beacon nodes that have rich routing tables, or everyone has all the information about the network. And I don't like this idea of super nodes that have more information than others because it goes against égalité, okay? If someone wants to attack the network, he only needs to control these super nodes, okay? So all these networks that have super nodes are not really decentralized. There are different degrees of decentralization. So, but the optimal one will be that there is no special nodes. There are no special nodes with more information. So some hints. Well, Bitcoin network does not use routing tables in order to propagate transactions, okay? Well, of course, the purposes of the Bitcoin network is slightly different maybe, but the transactions are propagated on the whole network, which gives some load to the network, but it works. I mean, we can see that zero confirmation transactions appear instantly when we send them to the network. And this is because it's a richly connected network and it propagates very fast. Now, it happens that I have a friend in Madrid that works on ANT routing algorithms and from a mathematical point of view. And these are very efficient algorithms to find paths. So what do the ants? What know the ants that we don't know? So you know, you are used to see these trails of ants that are able to find food in a very efficient way. So you just test it in your kitchen and you leave some food and you will see ants appearing after some time. So and they are really efficient. And the reason why they are efficient is that there has been a natural selection of these algorithms, and the ants with the better algorithms have survived over the others, all right? So it's a good reason to study this from a mathematical point of view. And first biologists did study that. So there were some experiments. So in order to find out how they find this best path for food, well, it's a very simple algorithm that you have food on one side, the ants on the other, and you have two channels. So after some time, you see that the circulation on both channels, if it's symmetric, of course, it will be the same on both channels. But then if you take one channel that is longer than the other, what happens is that after some time, the ants will prefer the short path than the other one. So how they do that? How they know? Because locally they don't know. They don't have a global information of the geometry of these channels when they enter, right? So the trick, and the nice trick that they use is that they leave a trace of pheromones. So pheromones are like hormones, but in the external world. They have an effect on a social effect on the ant community, and they keep a trail and they leave information. So another experiment of Gauss and company is the following, is that you have the same type of geometry, but only the longer channel. You leave the longer channel, and then after some time you open the shorter channel. And what you observe is that this time, the ants do not take the shorter channel, but they keep going to the longer channel, because what is happening is that they already left the trace of pheromones, so they prefer the longer channel. So if you wait much longer, they will end up also taking the shorter channel. But at the beginning, so the pheromones also have some evaporation, so they disappear. But at first, there's a trace that marks the good path and the effective path. So the marked path with pheromones, and also a very interesting thing is that the paths are reinforced with pheromones. So not only they have an algorithm to find the good path, but also over time they can optimize. If food changes of places, they will change their geometry and their path. So this type of idea of leaving a trail, we also know this from classical mythology, the Aryan thread myth. Okay, after all, it's an algorithm to exit a labyrinth, okay? And it consists also on leaving a trail, all right? Anyway, let's try to combine these ideas. So I'm going to explain a very simple routing algorithm which use this pheromone idea. So let's say that Alice wants to pay Bob, and so the first thing they do, they agree on a common big random number. Well, how big? 100 bits will be enough. And then Alice constructs her pheromone seed by concatenating the 0 bit with the random number, and Bob does the same, concatenates the 1 bit with the random number. And so we assume that Alice and Bob are on the Lightning Network, but they don't have an open payment channel, so they want to find a path to make the payment. So, some notations is that, so you can distinguish the random number by the pheromone seed because it's 1 bit longer, and the derived seed is going to be the random number, and the conjugate seed is just to exchange the first bit between 0 and 1. Just some notation. Now, what Alice and Bob do on their side, they propagate their seed on their end, so with the neighbors in the Lightning Network. So they will send the pheromone seed to the neighbors they have an open payment channel, okay? And so I'm going to describe the dynamics of the algorithm. There's some propagation over the network. So any node that receives a pheromone seed, so he notes from which neighbor it's coming, and he checks if S or the conjugate seed is on the mempool. So if he has received it earlier. Now, if none of them was received, that he stores S in the mempool and propagates the seed to his other neighbors, right? And if S is already in the mempool, but not the conjugate seed, then nothing else needs to be known. It's already received earlier and it propagated. Now, the other case is that S is not in the mempool, but the conjugate seed is in the mempool. This means that this node has received the pheromone seed from Alice and from Bob, right? So then a matching occurs. So he noticed the matching, and then he adds a bit, and constructs what I call the matched seed. All right? So it distinguishes from a pheromone seed because it has one more bit. And then he propagates it back because he knows from where it came. All right? So what the nodes do, once they find a matching, they propagate it back, but selectively, knowing to the other end they receive it. Okay? Now, in the case where S and the conjugate S were both in the mempool, it means that a matching occurred earlier and nothing needs to be done. All right? So what happens after some time, if we follow this simple algorithm, is that Alice waits and she will receive after some time. So, okay, under the assumptions that the graph is richly connected, if you have disconnected components, of course, Alice will never receive back the matched seed. There will be no matching. So if she waits for some time, she will receive some confirmed seeds from different neighbors. She can wait whatever she decides to, and indeed she will choose one of the matched seeds and decide that this is the confirmed seed. Okay, so we'll add another bit 0 so one bit longer to decide that this is the good one, and she will send it back in the same way it came, and then the nodes will propagate back, but selectively, this confirmed seed that will arrive to Bob. So Alice waits that Bob gets this confirmation, and then it means that a path has been found, okay? And Alice decides that the payment is going to be done through this path. Then you use the usual concatenation of payment channels to make the payment, all right? Okay, so Bob signals to Alice, and they initiate the payment through that path, all right? Through the standard implementations and the specifications that exist in the Lightning Network paper. Now, okay, what I describe here is a very simple algorithm that doesn't take into account volume nor fees. So you can add volume and fees in different ways. So first, Alice, well, what is natural to do is to add several fields to the pheromone seed, an amount field for the amount of payment, a maximum fee field, and a current fee field that they initialize to 0. So then what happens is that the algorithm is exactly, well, little bit the same. The only thing is that nodes only propagate the pheromone seed to channels that are compatible with the volume, all right? If the amount to be paid is larger than the volume, then it cannot go through that channel, so you don't propagate the information to that neighbor. Each node will increase the current fee field by his own field. So he's free to put the fee he wants. But of course, if he's if he wants to take a lot of fees, what may happen is that it will reach the maximal amount fee and then it's not propagated anymore, right? So there's a dynamic, it will be a natural market of fees that will develop in that way. So what happens then is that when the matching occurs, the node that is matching the two pheromone seeds will complete the amount fee field, okay, with his fee plus the two fees that come from each side, okay? Will give the total fee. Of course, he can increase his fee to match the maximal fee, but maybe it's not wise because, after all, Alice at the end will choose which path she will want to send her payment. So if the fee is maximal, maybe she finds other paths where the fee is lower, okay? So this is a little bit the dynamics of this algorithm. Now, how is the mempool managed? Well, the point is to renew this mempool. I mean, the payments are supposed to be done in a few seconds, okay? So the data should be discarded after some threshold time that they call T0. T0 could be 5 seconds or 2 seconds, so whatever the node decides. He manages the data and decides what is optimal for him to keep the data, and depending on the size of the mempool. Now, so after a period of T0, the data is erased, and Alice chooses her own waiting time. So she can wait 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. More time she waits, more possibilities she will have to choose the payment path. And probably she wants to use the minimal fee path. This would be the natural thing, but there's a trade-off between waiting more time and getting lower fees, all right? Anyway, she's free to choose these parameters. And, well, I mean, about how big should be this mempool? Well, indeed, it's not very big if you think about it. This seeds is essentially a random number that should not conflict with another random number in a few seconds. So I guess with all the amount fields, etc., something like 30 bytes will be probably acceptable for the pheromone seeds, and the other seeds are essentially the same length. And if T0 is about 2 seconds, depending, you know, what is key here is the speed of communication. If the speed of communication is faster, then you can process more transactions. But of course, there's an overload of the network because all these pheromone seeds are circulating everywhere. And so with these settings, with a mempool space of a few megabytes, you should be able to process several thousand transactions per second. Another problem is the communication, okay? Are you going to be able to communicate and send these pheromone seeds at this speed? This is another problem. So, as I said, this is a first draft, and what is lacking here, and I think it's important to do, oh, well, yeah, before I do that, well, I mean, you need to do some numerical simulations, of course, in order to see what are realistic parameters. But an interesting feature is that this algorithm can be used to be self-improve itself. I mean, the nodes are not forced to broadcast the pheromone seeds to all their neighbors. They can really broadcast the pheromone seeds only making a selection of the neighbors. They will have some data. They know the historical data of how many neighbors are efficient to relay payments and which ones are not. So they may prefer some neighbors to others. So in some situations, they may prefer just to relay the pheromone seeds only to the more efficient ones. And this data, also the topology of the network changes. So if the network is changing, what good neighbors may change, all right? So in order to implement this and make the algorithm more efficient, each node can store historical information and compare it to short-term information. And then put some weighting on his neighbors, on his payment channels, to see which ones are more efficient. So this allows you to tune up the algorithm for each node. And indeed, the nodes that do the best analysis will increase traffic and profitability. So in some sense, there is some incentive to be effective here. Now, of course, what is lack is some numerical simulations that I haven't had time to do, but I plan to do with some people in Madrid that have done numerical simulations for ARM routing. And so the paper is just a description of what I told you. It's only a first draft. And of course, for scalability and the resources needed, we need these simulations very much. And then also what is very interesting, I think, from my point of view, is this dynamical study of self-improvement. Because there we have a real dynamical system which is very rich in this network. The type of network that we have for Lightning is similar to what we have for Bitcoin. These are not random networks. These are not homogeneous networks. These are kind of, when you look at the number of neighbors of each node, it follows a Pareto distribution. I mean, older nodes have more neighbors, okay? So there's some kind of approximate model of the networks we have, and for the networks we want to optimize all these parameters. And of course, communication speed seems to me the main bottleneck, but the thing is that you don't need to communicate through the same client of the Lightning Network. You can communicate in any way you like, okay? So probably more efficient nodes will have some superhighway communication channels, right? Will be more interesting. This will be the bottleneck, really, to communicate in a fast way in order to find the routing. Now, the properties is that you don't need routing tables for that. I mean, if you pay attention to what I told you, nobody has information about the network topology. So you are a node here, you know your neighbors, but you don't know anything else. You know that you receive some pheromone seeds on one side, you transmit to the other, but you don't know Alice, you don't know Bob, you don't know for who who is the recipient of the payment, who is the issuer of the payment, which gives a lot of anonymity, all right? So other nodes different from Alice, even the neighbor nodes don't know it, okay? So we have an equal role for all nodes, so this is good from the decentralization point of view. And hopefully there's some scalability that pending numerical simulations, and then you have these self-improvement features. So indeed, this is just some ideas so people can develop it fully. I mean, since this network is very rich, it's also resilient, it's anti-fragile, like the Bitcoin network. And well, I think I will finish here, and I'm open for questions.
Thanks for your talk. This is very interesting. When the node finds a match between the pheromone and the other side of it, how does it communicate the route? Is that part of the pheromone, the hops until then and the hops
How
back?
it does communicate what?
How does it communicate the route eventually? Because now it's found a match, but how does it then tell the
When he finds a matching, he noticed that it's a match because he received one pheromone seed from Alice and one pheromone seed from Bob. It's a 0 and 1 and,
yes.
and the same random number. And so he appends a 0 bit to say that it's a matching, and he transmits it back to the neighbors from which it receives the pheromone from Alice, and it could be several neighbors.
But how does the original node that needs to send money know what the route is? Because he needs to construct
because
the
Alice will receive the matching, all these matching nodes, and then she decides, and then Bob also will confirm that she receives these matchings, and she will decide which matching seed is the good one. So what she knows is that is the neighbor where it comes from, so you know that there is a channel path, a composition of channel paths that goes to Bob, okay, and they initiate the payment that way.
Okay. And so you're sending the whole list?
No, you don't need to. You know the neighbor you have to pay to, and you know the specifications, the amounts, etc. So you can do it.
Well, I like the fact that you are thinking about alternative route finding algorithms for Lightning Network. In this specific proposal, it makes me a little bit worried about the scalability, that for every single transaction you have to flood the network with attempts to find a route. But even if this works for, let's say, honest attempts to perform payments, how would you protect this against denial of service attacks? That an attacker would just flood the network with new attempts to find routes again and again and again and again.
That's true. That indeed you need to do an in-depth security analysis of what type of attacks you can have. So the denial of service attack, etc. Essentially you could. What I describe for broadcasting the pheromone seeds is similar to what you have for broadcasting the Bitcoin transactions. So I imagine that the same type of measures can be used, all right? But of course, and there is a problem of scalability that depends very much on how fast you can, how many pheromone seeds you can process, the network can process, and this needs some simulations. But of course, we also have problems of scalability when we have many nodes and we need the whole routing table, right? So I think this is just let's say a very different proposal that maybe doesn't work, but we can have in mind and do some numerical experiments. This is...
Hey, thank you for the talk. Nice talk. How does this compare to the Speedy Murmurs work by Stephanie Rose and Pedro Moreno Sanchez et al.?
Can you repeat, please?
How does your work compare with Speedy Murmurs, if you know about that work?
No, I don't know about that. So
okay.
I'm very sorry because I'm not a specialist on routing or whatever. So I'm a mathematician. I know the algorithms about graphs, etc. I know that most of the routing algorithms on the internet use routing tables. In some sense, I don't know, but I think for payment networks is much more important to be decentralized, in the sense that when there is money, there is risk of attacks. So I think decentralization is a feature of security.
Yeah.
So this is one why I wanted to take a completely different approach. So probably, well, indeed, there are already unrooting algorithms. There is a book. If you look at in the paper, I make a reference. There's a general book on ant algorithms, and there is a whole section on routing data on the internet with virtual ants. These are algorithms also that have some similarities with what I described. I don't know if they have ever been implemented, but the purpose is different because it's not about transmitting money, so it makes the...
Yeah, so this algorithm is for payment networks. I can send you a link, maybe.
Hello, this might be way off my skill level really, but if I remember correctly, the default fee is 1 millisatoshi or something?
Sorry?
The default fee is 1 millisatoshi in the Lightning Network, right?
Yeah, well, Satoshi has some discussion about how to make payment channels, etc.
Yeah, well, in the Lightning Network.
Yeah.
So if everyone has 1 millisatoshi as the default fee, and if you see one of those seeds coming back with, say, 7 appended, can't you sort of deduce that you are the 7th step in the Lightning Network?
Yeah, that's a good point. Indeed, from the, well, I described the simplest thing you can do is that you have an amount fee field, and from this you have some inference of how many nodes you have. But there is a way of concealing this also if you want. But then it makes more complicated because you have to go one way or, well, anyway, you can really conceal the amount fee and everyone puts his own amount and you know, you can deduct it from the total payment. But then you have to check that what you want to pay is compatible with what has been deducted. But the way I describe it is not as anonymous as you would like because there is this correlation between the amount fee and the number of nodes.
The maximum fee field seemed to be some kind of anti-flood measure to stop a seed from propagating beyond where it makes sense. But I was wondering, have you considered removing it because it adds extra data to the seed, and perhaps it's quite difficult to estimate without knowing the global state of the network what the maximum fee should be.
Well, I guess I think we will need some numerical experimentation to see really, I mean, to where we want to scale and what parameters needs to be changed. But, well, on one part, to fix the maximal amount limits the propagation. The amount of the payment is necessary and also limits the propagation. But also, I expect that if this is functions, then the nodes will limit the propagation. They won't send the pheromone seeds to all the neighbors, okay? But then you know, it will be also a trade-off. If the network is clogged, then at the same time, the nodes themselves will be more selective. So there will be some equilibrium reached at some point. You know, because after all, the nodes that are there, they want to make a profit just relaying payments. Okay. Thank you.